I don't think there are many people who haven't heard of the UGG brand.
Pretty amazing, yeah.
So how in the world did you start this company?
Let's go back 45 years. I just spent 10 years studying and I finally graduated. I spent several weeks driving around Perth wondering what I'm going to do. And I got this massive dose of goosebumps. The answer was like, all the big trends are coming out of California, Brian. Go to California, you got to find the next big thing and bring it back to Australia. It was late October, the water was getting cold. And I remember getting out of the surf and I was with my buddy Doug and I was pulling on my UGG boots that I'd brought from Australia and I got these goosebumps again. There are no sheepskin boots in America and 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear. I looked at Doug and I said, we are going to be instant millionaires. It turned out not to be that easy. We added up our sales, which didn't take long. It was 28 pairs. That was hugely disappointing. I would love to have given up right then, but I've got 480 something pairs of boots and all my investors' money's tied up. I started going to swap meets and street fairs. The best thing I had going was the parking lot at Malibu. I had people coming to me from all over. We sold about $6,000 worth of boots out of the back of the van. I got home and there were about 25 messages on my answering machine. And it was from all of these surf retailers. And they go, hey, Brian, I've had people in my store all day wanting UGG boots and I've run out. Can I come down and pick up some more? This goes true for every entrepreneur, every businessman, that your best decisions come after a whole bunch of disasters. You never learn from the good things that happen. But disaster after disaster made me figure out what's the catalyst here.
You've seen people wearing these things everywhere. Heck, you might even have your own pair. Talking about UGG boots. Today, I'm fortunate enough to sit down with Brian Smith, the founder of UGG, who shares his story of how he built this billion-dollar shoe empire. And it is fascinating. This has got to be one of the top all-time interesting entrepreneur stories in history. You guys are going to love it.
Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark.
Brian, thank you again so much for agreeing to spend this time with us. Look, I don't think there are many people who haven't heard of the UGG brand. So how in the world did you start this company?
Let's go back 45 years, right? I'd just spent 10 years studying in the nighttime and working as a public accountant in the daytime. And I finally graduated and I quit the same day because I really hated accounting. And I spent several weeks driving around Perth wondering what I'm going to do. And I had just started meditating back then. I'd bought a book on yoga and it sort of led into meditation. And one morning I was sitting there just quietly thinking, what am I going to do? And I got this massive dose of goosebumps. And the answer was like, all the big trends are coming out of California, Brian. And you got to go to California, you got to find the next big thing and bring it back to Australia and make your lifetime around that. So literally within like 2 or 3 weeks, I arrived in LAX airport and I had my surfboard and my suitcase and I ended up renting a little house in Santa Monica and a Dodge van. And the first thing I did was drive up to Malibu to go surfing because I'd been, as a little kid from like 7 or 8 years old, I used to study surfer and surfing magazines and Malibu was always like my mecca. So I ended up going up to Malibu and surfing and I did that, every morning for maybe 3-4 months. And all the time I'm looking at billboards and I'm looking at newspapers and Wall Street journals and I'm, checking out everything I can for the next big thing, right? And it was like 4 months that I'd been in Santa Monica doing that. And one day it was late October, the wind had got really chilly and the water was getting cold because winter was coming on. And I remember getting out of the surf and I was with my buddy Doug and I was pulling on my UGG boots that I'd brought from Australia, and I got these goosebumps again. I went, oh my God, there are no sheepskin boots in America. And 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear, whether it's slippers or boots or whatever. So I looked at Doug and I said, oh my God, Doug, we're going to have to go into business, man. We are going to be instant millionaires. And you can probably identify with that because most people that probably come on your show had that aha moment when they were going to be instant millionaires, you know?
Absolutely.
Well, it turned out not to be that easy, but anyway, we ended up going back to my house in Santa Monica, and we did a bit of research, and we called a few manufacturers, and we settled with one, Country Leather in Western Australia, and we sent a couple of $100 down, and he sent us 6 pairs of samples. Doug was the salesman. I was terrified of sales. So he went on the road and he came back about 3 or 4 weeks later, and he had an envelope full of business cards for every single shoe retailer. And he said, Brian, they tell us we're crazy trying to sell sheepskin in California. And it, at first blush, it seems logical. But the thing is, California's climate's identical to Australia. So how come everyone in Australia wears these things, right?
Right.
And so it wasn't the reason. So when you hit that wall as an entrepreneur, you got to figure a way over it or around it or whatever, you know. And so I thought, well, how come all my friends up at Malibu think this is the best idea in the world? And it struck me that, oh my God, so many of them had been down to Australia on their surf safaris, and they'd come back with a half a dozen pairs of UGG boots for all their buddies. So within the surf community, it was really well known. And so Doug and I decided, okay, well, let's go after all the surf shops. And we searched all the yellow pages. This is before cell phones, obviously. And there was about 60 to 70 surf shops, from Santa Barbara all the way down to Mexico. And so we split them up, and I went down the coast route. And I remember I was so terrified. I went down Santa Monica Boulevard to Con Surfboards, which was the closest surf shop. And I was so sheepish. I was walked in there had my little bag of samples, and I was terrified. And anyway, I opened up the bag, and the owner, he goes, "Oh, UGG boots. What are you doing with those?" And I said, "Well, we're thinking of importing them into America." And he goes, "Oh my God, what a great idea. You're going to make a fortune. All my friends have got them. They think they're the best things in the world, Yeah. And so I packed up my little bag and I walked out of there thinking, well, this sales isn't so bad. And I went to the next surf shop. Oh my God, I'm wearing them now. These are the best things in the world. You're going to make a fortune. And this happened all the way from Santa Barbara all the way down to Mexico, and Doug was doing the San Fernando Valley, same thing. And we finally met back at my little house in Santa Monica, and we knew we were going to be like so wealthy. And it never occurred to us, though, that we didn't ask for any orders. I mean, what's the point? We didn't have any inventory, right? So now we knew we needed inventory. And so by a pure fluke, my roommate, who worked in a corporate office in LA, said, there's some guys in my office who are looking to invest in outside businesses, can I introduce you? And he did. And we, just like that, we raised $15,000, which in today's money is about, we raised 20 grand actually, about $80,000 in today's money. And we sent 15 down to Australia and ordered 500 pairs of boots. And so now it's like mid-December, and the boots finally arrive, and Doug and I pick them up from the airport, and we stack up the third bedroom now into the warehouse, right? Yeah. And we packed up our big duffel bags, and now we had order pads, right, and a price list and everything. And we went back on the road, and I remember going down to Con Surfboards, and he goes, "Oh, well done, Brian, but we couldn't sell them in our store. We just sell surfboards and trunks and flip-flops. And, they're way too expensive for us. You should go to the shoe stores." Oh, wow. And it was like, oh, shit. Right. And I left there and I went to the next. "Oh, well done, Brian, but we just sell surfboards and bikinis and swim trunks and flip-flops, and we couldn't sell, too expensive for us." And this thing happened all the way down from, Santa Barbara down to Mexico. And we added up all of our sales after the first week. We regrouped and we added up our sales, which didn't take long. And it was 28 pairs.
Oh, wow.
Right. It happened to be exactly $1,000 by a pure fluke of math. But, that was hugely disappointing, as you can imagine. And, we delivered them and obviously we couldn't make a business out of this. Doug had to get another job. We couldn't pay my salary. So I would love to have given up right then, but I've got 480 something pairs of boots in the third bedroom and all my investors' money's tied up. So the bottom line is I started going to swap meets and street fairs and, anywhere I could get an audience, basically. And the best thing I had going for me was the parking lot at Malibu, right? Which I would end up surfing every morning at 6:30, get coffee around 8, get the newspaper, and I'd go and I'd open the back doors of the van, and I was open for business every day in the Malibu parking lot. Yeah, this went all through January, February, and March. And it got to be what today you call as a pop-up store, right?
Right.
And I had people coming to me from all over, from South Bay down in Long Beach. They'd come, I heard this guy in Malibu selling Uggs out of the parking lot, So I had people from all over LA coming up, and we sold about $6,000 worth of boots out of the back of the van, through March. And then, it got to be warm and nobody's interested. So, I just had to pack it up and this became a sort of a pattern, for how do I get rid of boots, So I got first was a summer job scraping the underneath the boats at Santa Monica, Marina Del Rey, and then the next season I thought, okay, well, I'm going to advertise. And so I got these really good looking models I hired and a photographer, and we posed them on the beach at Wind and Sea, which is, down in San Diego. Perfect hair, perfect clothing. The boots were like, this major part of the ad, right? And we ran those ads in Surf and Surfing and Action Sports magazines, and the sales went to about 20,000, and it should have been way, way more. And I couldn't figure it out. And so we closed that season down. My next job was construction in Beverly Hills, right? And then so the next summer I thought I'm going to get better looking models and more expensive photographer, right? And we posed them on the beach at Wind and Sea again with a perfect everything. And the sales went to about 25,000. And I was just blown away. I couldn't figure out what I'm doing wrong because, I thought I was doing everything perfectly. So the next summer I was working on a golf course out in East San Diego. And this summer I decided I'm just going to shut it down and go out of business because Americans don't understand sheepskin. They think it's too delicate. You can't get it wet. You can't get mud on it. Australians know you cannot rip a sheepskin, and you can wear them when they're wet and they still insulate. You wash them in the washing machine. Like, it was totally different to what Americans understood about sheepskin. And so I just decided I'm going to sell everything out and shut it down. And so at the end of that summer, about October, every October, the big storm comes down from the north, and, Californians go, oh, it's winter, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I got home from the golf course, and there are about 25 messages on my answering machine. And it was from all of these surf retailers. And they go, hey, Brian, I've had people in my store all day wanting Ugg boots, and I've run out. Can I come down and pick up some more? And there were like 25 messages like that. Wow. And I realized, shit, I can't even go out of business properly. And
Oh, that's
so
funny.
I put in this huge order for Australia, a couple of thousand more pairs, and I delivered everything I had. And now I was faced with this advertising issue. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be in business, I got to figure out how to make them attractive. And so I called up a buddy of mine who was running this Scholastic surf team in Orange County. And we talked it through, and he said, you need a couple of young kids to sponsor. And he gave me Mike Parsons and Ted Robinson. And instead of posing them on the beach, we just went to and from Black's Beach in La Jolla and Trestles, which is San Onofre. And at the end of the walks are about a mile long, and there's always fantastic surf there. And I in the back of my mind, I figured every little kid who reads Surfer magazine, it would be a dream day for them to walk to Trestles or to walk to Black's with Mike or Ted. And so anyway, I ran those ads, October, November, December, and the sales went to $220,000. Why? Because I finally figured out what marketing and sales and advertising is. And you never advertise your product, right? The ads that worked, in a full page ad, the boots were like a quarter of an inch, and they were covered with their jeans, right? So you could hardly even see the boots. And yet I knew that every little kid who was looking at that photo would absolutely die to be in that photograph. Right. And so that's when I learned you never advertise the product. So if, for instance, you have a software program that you're trying to launch and it saves time, you don't show photos of the back of engineers at the computers or the packaging, or, you show a guy in the Bahamas with a drink, sipping rum drinks while he's using up all the time he saved from your program. You get it? You see how subtle that is?
Absolutely.
And so when I learned that, it really turned the business around. And even though you would think that was a 3 or 4 year disaster, it was really, and this goes true for every entrepreneur, every businessman, that your best decisions come after a whole bunch of disasters, right? You never learn from the good things that happen. Everything goes right. You never learn. But disaster after disaster made me figure out what's the catalyst here. And, after I sold the company, I wrote this book called The Birth of a Brand.
Yeah.
Right. And the theme of it is you can't give birth to adults. Right? You can't give birth to adults. And it's especially true for entrepreneurs, because you have this aha moment, like when you conceive of this new concept, and just like I did, you're going to be an instant millionaire, right?
Yeah, right.
And then you take the first action, and like for me, buying 6 pairs of samples was the first action, and that's the birth. So the birth of UGG was 6 pairs, and then it just lies there. And it lies there. You're like, for UGG, it was 3 years just lying there because I was just screwing up all of the fundamentals of advertising and marketing, right? But after a couple of years, or in some businesses it might be 6 months, you will go through this infancy where it just lies there, and there's no amount of overfeeding or jiggling the cradle. An infant can't get up and go to college, right? But eventually it'll start toddling, and that's when your buddies are all talking to all their friends about what you have, and the magazines are starting to write articles about you, and that quickly leads into the youth, where you've got consistent orders coming in, production's working, sales and marketing is, just everything's clicking, and you can run a $20-30 million company in that youth phase. But if it's a great product or a great service, it's going to hit the teenage years, and you want to be in every major trade show and every mass retailer, and it's so dangerous. You can strip yourself of capital like instantly, and by going too fast, too big. And so eventually the maturity comes when the accountants put all the controls in. So that's like how it got started. It took an instant to recognize the idea, and 4.5 years to get to where I understood what the hell I'm doing.
Golly, what a story! What a story! I mean, there's so much in there. I took a couple of notes. So I want to back up. So for the audience, I don't think that there's anybody in the audience who hasn't heard of this brand, but walk us through. So were they already called UGG boots when in Australia?
Yeah.
And if so, what does UGG stand for? And
nobody knows. Imagine Australia being a sheep country. Every little town, there's hundreds of towns, and every town has someone with a sewing machine, and they're stitching together sheepskins for either car seats or bed underlays or feather dusters and UGG boots. And this town would spell it UG, the next town would be UGH, and the next town would be UGHS, and and so when I came here and realized that they hadn't been marketed anywhere in America before, I registered the UGG because I thought that was the strongest version, but it's pretty much synonymous for what sheepskin boots are.
Gotcha. So it's sort of a cultural phenomenon in Australia that you decided to turn into a brand and build a business around.
Yeah, I didn't consciously think about branding. I didn't know much about branding. I was an accountant, right? But over the years, you know that saying, when you start out on a path, the universe will conspire to work with you?
Yeah.
By bumbling through those first years, the luckiest thing I did was I did register the trademark, right? And then I started to build the business, not realizing what the branding was, because I was killing my brand when, I'll tell you how I switched gears to Mike and Ted. When I was having a beer with one of my retailers, I was explaining this, conundrum that the advertising's not working. And he says, "Shut up, Brian." And he calls out the back to all these little 12, 13-year-old surf grommets. And he said, what do you guys think of UGG boots? And every one of them just walked down and went, "Oh, man, those Uggs, they're so fake. Have you seen those models? They can't surf," right? And the minute they said that, I just went, "Oh my God, I get it." And for 3 or 4 years, I'd been I'm thinking I'm building the image of the brand. I was burying the brand because these kids saw these ads as so fake. And when I saw it through their eyes, I was horribly embarrassed. And that's when I called my buddy in Orange County. And from then on, everything changed. After that, like, the market for snowboarding had just begun. Like, skiing was dying and snowboarding was coming on. So I went after all the youth snowboarders. And then a year or two later, I was having trouble getting to the kids back east. And I asked a sporting good buyer, what do the kids do here in the winter, for sport? And he rolls his eyes and goes, "Oh, they play hockey." And like, coming from Australia, I had no idea how big hockey was, and it's way bigger than surfing. Yeah. And so I started advertising to all the youth hockey players in Minneapolis and Boston and Chicago. And so by using that same principle of authenticity, right? I was advertising to 12, 13-year-old kids. Guess what? They're broke, but mom's got the money, right? So every Christmas, mom, all the cool kids at school got a pair of UGG boots. I want a pair for Christmas, right? So I didn't even bother advertising to the regular market. I advertised it to kids, and they had the buying power through mom. And then the moms eventually were going, "Wow, these are pretty good boots. I might get some for my daughter. I might get a pair for myself, And so we backdoored into the female market by going after all these young athlete kids. It was really an interesting experience.
Yeah, that is interesting. And so the mistake that you were making early on is you were trying to sort of sell the product, sell the benefits of the product, but you figured out that you really were trying to sell a lifestyle or a vision or a dream, right? And
yeah,
an authentic one where the people Like the
Yeah,
people that would
I
actually
mean,
wear them were wearing them in your.
exactly. Yeah, like consumers are so savvy these days. You got access to anything you want on the internet, and consumers have just got really, really savvy. They can start to pick out bullshit, And so when we started to bring in these real kids, and this is 45 years ago. This is like the beginning of influencer marketing, right? When I used Mike and Ted, that was the beginning of influencer marketing, where every little kid just was dying to be in those ads.
So this was early 80s. You spent 3 or 4 years spinning your wheels, figured out through your mistakes the right path, and then it started to, is it fair to say it started to take off?
Yes, it did. It started to double every year. And that was a big problem for me. And it's a big problem for anyone who's in a product-based business, right? If you have to have inventory and you have to buy it early and usually pay half up front when the order and the other half up front before they ship, it's a very, very difficult period to go through as an entrepreneur. And it usually happens around the 1 to 2 million annual sales volume. This is when these problems arise, because you start to be too big to be small and too small to be big, right? You need a CFO, you can't afford one. You need a full-time warehouse manager, you can't afford one. And so all of these issues come up. But the worst part is in purchasing product, right? Because like I raised that $20,000 and spent $15,000 on product. Well, now I needed $100,000 for more product, right? Because all the orders are there. And so these guys didn't have that much money, so I had to bring in a bigger financier. And then after a month or two, they go, well, we don't want these old guys around. So I was forced to buy them out and bring the new guys in. And that happened twice, right? And so it finally got to this point where we needed containers full of boots, right? It got up into the several $1 million just for product. And I'd brought in 3 new guys. There was Neil, Paul, and Joe, and they were already in the distribution business in Anaheim, and they were in the ski market. And so the same thing, I had to buy out the old guys, and we moved everything up to Anaheim. And it was a sweet deal. We were going to own the company 25% each, for all 4 of us. Mm-hmm. And the best part was that they were going to run all the office, purchasing, delivery, taking in inventory, warehouse deliveries. And I was going to be on the road full time selling, which was, by now I'm like the master salesman, right? Yeah. So I loved that idea. But there was one proviso in this contract that I didn't get my 25% stock certificate issued until I finished a little trademark lawsuit that I was in with a company called UGG, which I knew I was going to win anyway. So we moved all the inventory up to Anaheim, and then I went out on the road after a week of getting organized, and I went down Beach Boulevard to Huntington Surf and Sport. And my buddy Dave down there, as soon as I walked in the door, he says, "Hey, Brian, I heard you sold the company." I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I called an order in this morning. They said you don't own the company anymore." I said, "You're kidding me. They said that?"
What?
And I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I went to the Shell gas station. This is before cell phones, right?
Yeah.
And I called up Neil, and I go, "Neil, what the hell are you telling people?" He said, "What do you mean?" So, "Well, you're telling them I don't own the company." And he says, "Well, you don't, And I said, "Yes, I do. You're my 3 new partners." And he says, "No, you don't get your stock certificate issued until you..." And I just went, "Oh, shit." I hung up. I drove from Huntington Beach straight back to San Diego. And I pulled out the contract and I read it. And I went, "Oh, shit. I don't own the company anymore." And I just went into this horrendous depression it lasted 3 or 4 days. And I didn't speak to anybody outside of my wife. I couldn't put a thought together on how to move forward. I'd seen myself as a CEO of this big international shoe retailer or wholesaler one day. and now I didn't even own the company, and I just moped about for like 3 or 4 days. On the fourth day in the evening, I was lying on my back on the floor in the living room, and the TV was on, and my wife was sitting up on the couch, and the show finished. I clicked it off, and I rolled over onto my stomach, and I started getting up on my hands and knees, and I started crawling towards the bedroom. And my wife, who was like a really quiet person, she just looked at me and said, "You get up now and walk to bed like a man," and she scared the crap out of me, to be truthful, and I sort of like came up off the floor, and it was like coming out of a fog. And I thought, oh my God, there's so much more to life than this crappy little sheepskin company. And that night I slept like a baby. It was amazing how well I rested, and the next morning I got up and I'm thinking, okay, well, what can I sell? I started my meditation. What can I sell? And I'm thinking, well, real estate, no. Business broker, maybe. Accountant, never. And then I thought, oh my God, and I got these goosebumps again. And so I'm going to segue here, because I do a lot of speaking from the stage, and I always ask the audience, raise your hands if you get goosebumps. Well, every time everybody does, right? So I said, let me tell you my take on this. God isn't out there at the end of the universe somewhere looking down over us. I have come to believe that there's a fragment of God in me, and if it's in me, it's in every single other human on the planet, and it has absolute perfection of knowledge, and it knows where it wants us to go in this lifetime. And every time we make a movement or an action or a thought that's in that direction, and it's a momentous one, which it could be life-changing, it sends a message to us going, yeah, you're on the right track. And it comes out through this electrochemical body, and it comes in the form of goosebumps. Wow. So I just want to challenge all your listeners and viewers that next time you get them, stop for a second, take notice and go, what the hell did I just think or do or see or realize? And I'll bet you'll find it's quite an important sort of milestone or a direction marker in your life. And so be prepared to pick up on it and follow it, because it's worked for me for 30 years now, because this is when I first discovered that theory, was about 30 years ago. And it's helped me immeasurably when I'm stuck.
I love that. So that's the intuition that you speak of, right?
Yeah. Why did I get that intuition? Because I suddenly thought, I got these goosebumps, and I thought, shit, sales. I love sales. And I thought, now what can I sell? Right? And that's when the goosebumps hit, and I go, oh my God. And I called up the guys at Anaheim. I said, look, I may never own this company, but I want to come back and I want to be the salesman, and I want to get a pair on every single person in America. And so one thing I ask is you don't ever tell anybody I sold the company, right? And so we made that deal, and it worked out. The next month I went back out on the road, and I got back to the warehouse, and Neil handed me an envelope for $5,000. And he says, that's your commissions for the month. And this was the 5th year. It's the first time I ever pulled any money out of the business. Right?
Oh my gosh.
And I got back the next month, check for $20,000. Next month, another check for $20,000. And I realized that, one of the great pieces of philosophy, and my book is full of philosophy, right? It's like every 10th page, there's a whole philosophy point. This one was that nearly always your most disappointing disappointments will become your greatest blessings. Right? And so I had this horrendous disappointment of losing the company. But then I started realizing after 3 months, shit, I'm making all this money. I'm not working because I'm going out, I'm surfing, or I'm playing golf with all the retailers. Yeah. I am having an absolute blast. And so that piece of philosophy, that nearly always your most disappointing disappointments will become your greatest blessings, paid out. And then the next 3 years became the best 3 years of my life in the UGG boot business. And the reason was because I ended up having 30 sales reps all across the country. and I would travel with each one at least once a year. And over the 3 years, I racked up over 1 million frequent flyer miles, right? Keeping track of this. But I'd fly into Denver, and that rep had to have his 10 best customers lined up ready for an appointment, right? And then I'd fly to Baltimore, right? He had to have his 10 best. And then it'd be, somewhere up in New York. He had to have his. And so I was visiting like 300 retailers per year and getting a rapport with each one of them. And it turned out to be like such a blessing because I was making so much money and free as a bird. I was using my own schedule, my own timing, and it turned out to be the best 3 years of my life.
Wow. That is an incredible story. You didn't have to deal with any of the headache of everything that you were having to deal with before. But I got to ask, what happened with, they said that you would get your stock certificate if you cleaned up the lawsuit with the trademark. Did that ever?
After 3 years, right, Neil had bought Joe and Paul out. So now Neil owned 100% of it. I'd finished the trademark lawsuit. So he called me up and said, "Hey, Brian, come in next Wednesday. I've got the lawyers all organized to come in." And over the weekend, we got a life insurance agent to do policies on each other. And we bought each other company. Well, the company bought us each new cars. So things seemed to be going good. And I was like on a high. And, I was driving around that Sunday afternoon and I got a call. And now it's the cell phone. It's like the size of a brick, with the cord.
Oh, yeah.
Went into the car.
Little briefcase thing or, yeah.
Yeah. And it was my wife, Laura, and she was crying. And I go, Laura, what's the matter? And she goes, "Oh, Brian, Neil's just died. And he'd been on a motocross race and had this massive heart attack and they couldn't revive him back at the hospital."
Oh.
And his wife, Della, had never set foot inside the business. She had no idea what UGG even was, right? And so I called her up. I went from being on an absolute high, I'm going to get my 25%, to an absolute low that now Della, the widow, owns 100% of it. She doesn't know what the hell she's got, right? So I called her up and I said, "Look, I'll be up tomorrow and we'll try and figure out where we're at." And the bottom line is I said, "I'll work for the year. I won't charge you anything. I'll just work off all my commissions and I'll try and see where we're at for the company." And then after the 3 best years of my life, I went through the worst year of my life, right? Because I had to drive to Anaheim and that was 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours a day on the road. So I started getting the train up and coming back Friday night. And I was always crippled with my throat, was so sore from working such late hours and everything. And I realized the company wasn't in that great a shape and so I needed to raise money and everything. And I'm not going to tell this whole story because it takes up 2 chapters of this, right? But it's very key. If you're an entrepreneur in my situation, you got to read it because it's like everyone's going to go through it, right? But the bottom line is, after that season, my supplier deserted and he thought I wasn't going to make it, so he found a different distributor. I went through the trade shows without any product to ship, and then in the 11th hour, I found a tannery in Australia to come through with some product, but it was too little too late. But between Christmas and New Year, the 2 weird things happened. The best thing was that I got a call from the life insurance brokers who we'd signed with earlier. And this was like January or February. It's now December and we've got a week to go to the end of the year, right? And he said, "Look, we want to get this claim. We know you didn't do the physicals, but we want to get this claim off our books by the end of the year. Can you come to LA?" So I went up to LA and we ended up spending the entire day negotiating. And I ended up getting a settlement which was several $100,000. It was enough to buy all of the inventory, all of the assets, all of the trade show materials, plus give Della, his wife, all the profits from the year, right? So all that money pretty much went straight to her, and she was then set for the rest of her life, right? And meanwhile, I'm broke, but I own 100% of the UGG company again, right? So who could have ever foreseen that coming?
Yeah.
And that's a testament to perseverance. Remember when I lost the company in the beginning?
Yeah.
I could have easily said, fuck it, I'm out of here, right?
Yeah.
But I had this belief that no, it's not the product's fault because everyone in Australia wears it. It's got to be my fault, right? So I got to figure out what I'm doing wrong. And that was rather an incredible testament to how perseverance will, circumstances always are changing. And as long as you hold the course, some good things are going to happen as well as bad things. And that settlement was like exactly what I needed. So after that, I was much more savvy on bringing on investors, and we ended up building the company way back up to about 15 million after that. But isn't it interesting how you can be on the bones of your ass in one moment and then back in business the other, only if you don't give up.
That is remarkable. And that's not even that long of a time span. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, just within a couple of years.
Yeah, those are 3 or 4 year time span. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Doing about, 12 million at this stage. And so we had plenty of money I hired a PR agency out of Boston, and we put together this huge, press kit. And I'd made an appointment for this Wednesday afternoon at USA Today's headquarters in Chicago at 3:00, right, with a girl named Peggy, right? And she was the fashion editor. And so we worked our way from Boston to New York to New Jersey to Philadelphia, and we practiced all the way. And we finally got to Chicago at 2:45, and we walked up, and I introduced myself and said, I'm Brian Smith for UGG, for Peggy. And Peggy comes running out, and she's going, "Oh, Brian, I'm so sorry. I've got to be in this conference. It starts at 3, and I just can't squeeze you in. I'm so sorry." And I just realized, we're screwed. This presentation is 40 minutes, and I've got all these press kit materials and stuff like that, and fabrics. And by a pure fluke, and this was intuition again, I realized I'm not going to be able to do the pitch. And so I reached down in my briefcase, and I had a little green folder, and it was full of all these images of celebrities that people had sent me from all over the world, right? I had Sting and Tom Petty and
Oh, wow.
Neil Young and all the Hollywood stars and starlets, and the Grumpy Old Men movie, Jack Lemmon,
Yeah.
And then I'm showing her all these celebrities, and I came to Pamela Anderson wearing a red swimsuit, and UGG boots on the beach. And I quickly flicked past that one because I knew nobody wears UGG boots like that. And I went straight on to Heather Locklear, right? And she says, go back. Who is that? And it was sent to me from a London tabloid newspaper, right? She grabbed it out of the file, and she wrote down the name of the photographer and the name of the publication. And she said, "Do you have a press kit?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Got to go," right? And so that took like 6 minutes.
Wow. And
she was gone. And I looked at the PR agency person. I just said that we just blew $60,000 on this campaign, And so the next day I was in Chicago airport and heading back to San Diego, and I bought a copy of USA Today, and I bought my coffee, and I went and sat down. I'm expecting nothing because this was like, 15 hours later. And I read the front of the USA Today, and then I looked at the money section, and then I flicked it over, and here's right in the center page of the lifestyle section is a photo of Pamela Anderson on the beach in UGG boots.
Wow.
And a little blurb underneath. And when you turned the page, the entire inside page was this expose on on sheepskin in fashion, the history of sheepskin in manufacturing,
Wow.
trends of sheepskin. She listed all my competitors, which sort of pissed me off. But she built this incredible story about how sheepskin footwear was taking over America. And when I got back to the warehouse in San Diego, I found out that the phones had not stopped all day from consumers wanting to know where the hell's a store in my area.
Wow.
To the stores themselves, the retailers going, shit, what the hell are these UGG boots? I've had 10 people in my store asking for UGG boots. I don't even know what they are, And so that was like a humongous breakthrough. And, I put this under the banner of karma, because I could tell you the book's full of shitty stories where everything went wrong. But now and again, there's a story that'll just lift you up through the roof. And that led to right before I sold the company. And it was this girl that every year, like 4 or 5 years, I'd been shipping 20 pairs to all her friends in London. And it was a pain in the ass because you had to do separate custom invoices and everything. And I didn't want to have my staff have to do it, so I did it myself. But it was Trudy Styler, who's the wife of Sting, and it was all her friends, right? And
wow.
I'd been doing this for a couple of years. And anyway, this Christmas, she called me and said, Brian, man, I need the hugest favor. I've just been to a seminar. It's changed my world. And I need the most perfect pair of tall, sand, whatever size UGG boots. And you have a pen? Here's where to ship them. I go, yep, I'm ready. She goes, Oprah, care of Oprah Winfrey, Chicago, right? And that was the year that Oprah was at her absolute peak of popularity. And you could not buy advertising space. It was that expensive. Well, it turns out we didn't announce that year that we had Oprah wearing Uggs because I'd been so victimized of previous years where we couldn't keep up with the product shipping because we didn't have enough money. But now I was in contract with this company I was selling to that had, $28-30 million worth of capital. And so I said to everybody, let's not mention it this year. And then next year I got everything ready. And my job was to sort of consult to Deckers, who we ended up selling. And I put together this campaign for Oprah. And by the time we launched it, she had like 20 minutes out of a 45-minute show. 22 minutes was the elves running around with UGG boots,
God,
and
yeah. You get a pair. Yeah,
Oprah's best picks for Christmas. All the audience had boots, and I mean, you could not have paid in dollars for that amount of exposure that we got. And then that took it not just into America, that took it all worldwide. And over the next 3 or 4 years, Deckers Corporation, took advantage of that, and it just that's how it got to be in the billions.
Gosh, unbelievable. Look, I wish that we had 2 hours, not only because your story is interesting, but because you have such great anecdotes.
Yeah, well, I hope all your listeners and lookers will look at the book because it's a roadmap. I'll hold it up again. It's a roadmap for entrepreneurs. And it's not all about, and I made millions here, so I turned that into millions here, and then I made more millions. Yeah, it's nothing like that. It's all more stories of the real world. And there's something for everybody. I mean, after I speak on stage, I'll have people come up to me and go, oh my God, I just heard you say this, and it's exactly what's happening in my life. Well, she's probably the only person that heard that because other people heard things totally different, right? So wherever you are in your stage of growth, you're going to pick up. That's the universe coming in and talking to you. It only tells you the information you need right now. You'll get the other stuff later on,
I love it. The Birth of a Brand. The Birth of a Brand is the name of the book. Well, Brian, I'm about to push up on time here, but I got to ask, first of all, I like how passionate you are about sharing your story, through your book. Where does that part come from? Is it because you wish somebody had shared these stories with you, or do you just have a altruistic gene? Or
Oh yeah, like there was no group that I could go to when I was building the company. Now you have YPO, EO, SAGE. There's all sorts of support groups that I could have benefited from, but I was like Robinson Crusoe out there, just an accountant trying to be a marketer, and
Yeah.
so it was very, very difficult for me. But no, my enthusiasm comes from I just love seeing the entrepreneurial wheels turn, and pretty much all businesses are the same. The medium will be different. Like back when I sold the company, the first desktop computers were just showing up, right? Way before cell phones, way before, and so all the medium was different, but the principles of marketing haven't changed a bit. And I'm so passionate speaking to groups because the reaction I get afterwards, when people come up and tell me what they just witnessed or saw, is just it's very fulfilling. It's like keeps me young.
Yeah, I love that. Well, speaking of keeping you young, so if you were able to go back and have a conversation with your younger self, the self that just arrived in California from Australia, and you only had a minute to talk to yourself, what do you think that you would say?
Let's fast forward that to 2 or 3 years in. I would have said, Brian, get someone who understands finance. Because even though I was an accountant, like a CPA, I had no clue about finance. Accounting is what happened last year. Financing is what's going to happen the next 2 or 3 years. And I had no idea about forecasting and inventory and carrying stuff over the summertime and how to set up letters of credit. I had no clue about that. And had I had a good financial partner, we would have avoided most of that. I could have even owned the company still today. I mean, I'm glad I don't, but it's something that would have been much more possible. But I just, if you look at all of the bad decisions and all of the bad eventualities that happened in the business, it was nearly always because of lack of money for buying inventory.
Interesting.
Yeah, never about sales. I had more sales for 15 years than I could ever want. I just could not get the inventory.
So most of the time, it was a logistics and fulfillment challenge, really.
Yeah,
You couldn't get to
yeah.
the shoes to where people wanted to purchase them.
That's right. Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, it's probably, maybe it worked out the way it was supposed to. Maybe it was a good thing, because maybe you wouldn't have learned the lessons that you learned if you had a great finance person.
I've wisdom comes from all the screw ups. So that's the part that I love taking away.
Yeah. Well, look, I love to hear your story. And if before we wrap up, if talking to a struggling entrepreneur, somebody who is at the point where they're close to giving up or are so frustrated with this or that, you have any parting wisdom or thoughts?
The best quote in my book, and it's going to sound trite, but it's one of the most powerful pieces of philosophy. The quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live every day happily as a tadpole. And if you're an entrepreneur, that's what you have to master. Every day, get up and do something that moves you a little bit forward. Remember I told you the first 5 years of UGG, I made nothing and the company made nothing. I read Shoe Dog, which was by Phil Knight, who was the founder of Nike. And would you believe that the first 5 years sales of UGG was greater than the first 5 years sales of Nike?
You're kidding.
Right? So as bad as I was doing, they were doing worse. But every day they showed up and put one more foot forward. And it was a fascinating story of how they blundered through that first 5 years. But when the sport of jogging took off, they got sucked into that market because they'd been there for 5 years advertising in running magazines. So when societal shift took off, they got sucked into it. They couldn't help themselves. Same happened to Reebok with aerobics. They'd been around for 5 or 10 years, but when aerobics took off, they got sucked into it, right? For us, we'd been struggling for 20 years, and then Oprah got it, right? And she sucked us up into the billions. So the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog, and that includes Nike, is to live every day happily as a tadpole.
That's deep. I really like that.
It's really deep, yeah.
It seems, like you said, it seems trite, but it's actually very, very philosophical.
Yeah, well, this has been great. So if any of your listeners or viewers are part of big groups, like marketing groups or sales groups, or, it doesn't matter, whatever. I speak to financial groups. I speak to everybody. But if you have a conference coming up and you'd like a great keynote talk, that's what I do, and that's what I love,
So where would we go to try to book something like that?
My website is uggfounder.com or briansmithspeaker.com. And all of my contact information is on the contact page in the back.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we can drive some traffic your way, because I know that there's a lot of folks that are looking for great speakers.
Excellent.
Brian, again, I can't thank you enough. There's something about you, your personality or your aura, that is just very joyous or happy. I can't quite articulate.
Well, that's one of my highest compliments. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
It comes through. It even comes through the screen. It puts me in a good mood and makes me want to listen to what you have to say. So I love it. Thank you for sharing with us.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.